Welcome to the Way of Christ Ministries. I'm Brother Harvey Smith. We are going to be talking today through a PowerPoint presentation, and we're going to be talking about teaching. Teaching is very important for us as Christians, and I think that maybe a lot of Sunday schools we have a lack of teachers who know how to put a class together. And this class is really designed to bridge that gap there to bring qualified teachers into Sunday school classrooms and maybe even just small groups, help you give you an idea how to put a small group class together. The idea is that I think that there will be a lot more teachers out there for the Sunday school if we had people out there who are teachers, right? Christians who thought that they had the basic tools in order to be a good teacher. I think that's the main thing that whenever I asked people in our church if they would like to be teachers, I think a lot of them really are excited with the idea of it, but they get terrified because they don't know exactly what the steps are, how to get a class together, how to come up with a curriculum, and that kind of thing. And although the church and pastors are there for that to help, I find that also in some other churches that I've been in, been a member of, part of, is growing up, and is that there's really, initially, it seems that teachers just get thrown into a classroom because they just have an interest, and there's no real, any kind of education that goes on for teaching this teacher how to present material or how to get the class together. So this is kind of a little small series of classes to help you do those things. So I named this one Teaching and How to Prepare a course that you have never taught before or never taught. So the things we're going to be covering here is going to be how to prepare a course, and the objective is going to be to instruct new Bible study and Sunday school teachers in how to make a course of study. The students should be able to, when they're done with this class, they should be able to outline a course, determine its course objectives, determine the subject matter of the course, determine the training objectives, create a suitable title, determine a target audience, and identify necessary resources for the students themselves, and plan for costs, whether it be for the student or for the teacher, because teaching costs no matter what you are teaching or whatever, there's just different resources and things like that that go into teaching, and time and availability, facilities, those kinds of things, and those all do have some kind of little cost at least. And I don't think that a lot of us realize that. Even these internet courses and stuff like that, they still cost to produce these things, to get these things out there so that people can see them. So just a side note on that, just if you do have someone that you do appreciate knows, I know sometimes it gets kind of boring or whatever, to go through those things, or to you feel like someone's always trying to get money from you or whatever, but it does cost those institutions and those teachers to produce that material, and it does take their time, a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to do these things, but with this course I'm hoping that it will help refine some things for you. That way you have to keep costing you over and over again. So determining evaluation standards also would be something we want to consider, because if we're teaching a class, we want people to actually learn something, right? All right. So here's an example of something that you may want to write out in the background of your mind, or a scratch piece of paper. When I was in the Army, we always had to have what we call the task, conditions, and standards when we were teaching a class. This it helps the teacher to focus on what it is you're trying to do and the expected results of that. And so some things that go into it sounds pretty easy. I mean, basically what we want to do is we want to identify what the task is, what it is we're trying to teach. On this one here, I'm trying to teach you how to teach a class, or at least to get a basic fundamental of the stuff that you don't normally see, or maybe you wouldn't consider in order to make your class a better class. So the conditions for this class, though, are over the internet, or it could be, I've designed it to where it can be done in the classroom study also. So either one, if I decide to give an in-person class about how to give a class, how to teach, then I can also do this right here. What we're doing is over the internet, we're producing these classes. so that you will also be able to have an understanding. So that is the conditions. The standard. Well, standards is that students should be able to produce a course outline and syllabus. That's the kind of goal that we want. And later on, we'll get into more about feeling comfortable about how to present the class and that kind of thing. But for right now, what I want you to be able to do is just to develop an outline of what it is that you're trying to teach. So, the course, the things that we'll be covering in this, it's going to be the course title, learning objectives, sources, or costs. Is it a cyclic course or not, which means is it going to be repeated? How do we learn? Well, we'll be learning. How will the learning be evaluated? If I could get my talking this during this class, would be all right. Create a syllabus and developing the class. Course title. We start with course title because it just seems like to most people that would be the exact thing that you wanted to, and this is going to give you the direction of where you're going. In actuality, probably the course title itself is probably going to be the last thing you're going to do, but it does help us to identify what it is that we want to look at as far as what the subject matter is going to be, because a course title should reflect the subject matter. With the example we have here of this class that I'm doing, it is teaching and how to prepare a course that you have never taught. So whenever I had started developing slides, I had never taught this course before. So I decided I'm going to teach a course on how to teach a course that you've never taught before. And so then that's how I got the title. But as you notice, it is totally dependent upon the subject matter that I'm trying to teach on. So if you're trying to teach on Noah, then maybe yours would be, if you're going to do a series of classes on Noah, then maybe it would be, you could just title it Noah, like I got at the top there, teaching. And then as you go through each part of the experience that Noah did in the Bible, then you would say, you could actually just put the texting in there. Could be the lower deal, could be the referencing for the scripture that you're going to be talking about, and just another little subheading for that if you want to do that. Consider doing the flood, the first before the flood, Noah prior to the flood, and then you can talk about what life was like before the flood, because that's an important topic, because Jesus mentions it before the flood is the way it was going to be in the last days before he returns again. So that's a pretty good little course there, and something you may want to do before the flood, right? Or before the last days may be a good thing there, because then you could do if your class is going to be prophetic into or looking at the way things were like before, and then carrying them over into what things should be like before Christ returns, and then you can draw that correlation between Noah getting on the ark and Jesus returning. So it's a possibility, something you could do. Anyway, so your course title is actually going to be dependent upon your course subject, what your material, what you're going to be handling in your biblical text. So with that, now we have our subject and we have a possible title, probably throwing around a couple of names. I say the title, you really don't need to finalize it until you're done, because that's going to change as you go through your material and as you learn more doing your studying. And by the way, we do have a separate set of courses that are designed to help you study the Bible, and you'll need that in use with this right here, with these teachings. So your learning objectives of the course is basically you want to be able to sit back and look at and you say, what is it that I'm trying to teach? What is it that I want them to know? And you want to be able to say it to them in a way that they'll understand it. It's like this one is how to prepare a course that you've never taught. Now you have to go through what's important for the class. That was my little brief attempt earlier when we said that a lot of churches are just kind of failing in this area of teaching Sunday school teachers how to teach and how to get a curriculum together. And we want to bridge that gap. The importance is because it's important what we teach other people and how we teach them in order for them to learn. We want to be as organized as we can. We want to be prepared for any unforeseen events that may occur, and we want to be well studied, and we want to rehearse a little bit so we can get our information, our thoughts going through there. We can run through our material, make sure everything's okay. But the importance is, all that work is that the student learns more about, in this case, how to teach. But with your course, it may be, if an example we're using Noah, it may be how life was like before Noah had to go in the ark. And what's the importance of that? How does that relate to us today? So there's your deal. So who is the intended audience? Obviously, you're going to Prepare your material. You're going to study your material just as hard as if you're going to do it like you're going to go for college, or write some kind of college paper or something like that. So you're going to have all this knowledge, but the course itself, the material that you're going to, the way you're going to present it, is going to be dependent upon the audience that you're going to. I would teach differently to a college audience versus I would to someone who is, in grade school, or even high school. Each of those different audiences have a different subject, a different way that I would approach the subject in order to get the information out. So it's important that we understand who it is, who's our target audience for while we're teaching. For this class, I'm expecting you to be probably close to my age, and I'm expecting maybe in the early 20s at the earliest of that. And I'm also expecting you to have a somewhat of an interest, a self-motivated interest to want to learn how to do this, because you're fixing to be a teacher, or you already are a teacher, and you're wanting to find a way to be a little bit smoother, a little bit better in what you're doing. So that is my target audience. What is expected of the student? Well, want to identify what the student is to learn. We covered those earlier in our previous slides, what it is we're expected to learn here. And it's good to go ahead and let the students know at your class when you're going to be doing that. In order to do that, you have to identify it for yourself. What would I say are my deliverables to the student? I guess you would say, if we were doing a different type of presentation, that would be the wording you would use there. What are the things that's important for the student to know in order for them to move ahead or be able to move into the next phase of the subject matter? So if you're doing a whole course, then you would want to identify things in the course that's important, that kind of interconnect throughout the deal. So then that would actually identify as your separate classes in there. So if we're going to do, sticking with Moses, if we're going to do a overall class, Noah, if we're going to do an overall class on Noah, then we would go through and say, okay, I want to start with Noah before the flood. I want to start with Noah during the flood, what happens during the flood. And then I want to go with Noah immediately after the flood. And then I want to do a deal of maybe sins of the people, right? I want to do a deal on Jesus in Noah. And then I want to do a deal on deliverance, right? God's provisions. And I can make all those are 4 or 5 different classes already. And that identifies what it is I'm going to, throughout the whole course, I'm going to identify some things that the students should know by the time they're done with the whole course. They should know what life was like before the flood. They should know what life was like on the ark. They should know what life was like immediately after. They should know how they could find Jesus and tell people about Jesus while they're telling the ark story, and then, or the Noah story. And then they should be able to find exactly how it is that God redeemed people through the experience that we read about in Noah's ark. So those are some things that we would go for a course. And then that also gave us our classes in there. So then inside each class, we'd want to kind of go back through there and identify those individual things also. And we'll talk more about that. I'll probably repeat myself, but we'll talk more about that later. All right. So that's the expectation of the students. What are they going to learn? And then it kind of goes on along with what are the benchmarks of learning? What are the things, the supportive things that they're going to need to know? And if I were to put this in some kind of like army term or something like that, in order for soldiers to march or put on a parade, they have to know how to walk like a soldier. And they need to how to face to their left like a soldier, how to face to the right like a soldier, how to turn around while they're a soldier, and then look like a soldier. They need to know how to dress like a soldier. All those are supportive tasks that go into the act of actually marching to put on a parade. So all those things would have to be individually taught. Make sure we taught those things, because you can't move on to the next one without, you can't, if you don't know how to walk, how big of a step a soldier takes, then he can't walk with other soldiers, and so you can't be in a unit, and the unit can't march. If everyone doesn't know what the left face is, then no one can march together, because they'll all be turning different directions when the command's given. And so those kind of things, those are benchmarks of learning. And you could do the same thing with your Sunday school class. Identify what things to where everybody needs to be on the same sheet of music. We would call those doctrines. What are the doctrines that we really need to make sure that the people understand? What is salvation? What is deliverance? What is justification? Those kinds of things would all go into Noah's Ark. And we need to make sure that we have those things covered, and they're covered adequately. So, sources. what are the things that we're going to need to put on this class? Again, part of this depends upon who it is, our target audience is, but also our conditions of the class. Where are we giving this class at? Is it going to be in a classroom environment? Is it going to be on the internet? Is it going to be out in the field, right? Or we do have a church that's going to be meeting outside that, for wherever any portion of this class, or is the whole class going to be giving in a natural environment? Those kinds of things. Is it going to be night? We're going to be outside at night? Do we have lighting? Do we have any other things? Do we have projectors available? All those kinds of things. So these are things that we would need to give to class. Of course, we'd also have to need our primary text. What is the text that we're going to be taking out of? And that's the main thing there. Because if we have that right there, we can go ahead and we can give the class. The other stuff just kind of adds to it. But what we want to do is we identify what our primary text is that we're going to be teaching, because that's also what we're going to give to the student, because we want the student to be able to learn, right? So he's got to be able to read that primary text themselves prior to the class, if at all possible. But if not, then at least during the class, and then to renew their learning afterwards. We'll get into that stuff later. But then you need to identify what your primary text is you're going to be teaching out of. And this would go fine for sermons or whatever also. But we also want to make sure that we have whatever software is necessary to do whatever we want to. I know I've been to some churches to teach for them different classes, and they don't have these things available. They don't have this Microsoft Office suite where we can do this PowerPoint presentation that we're doing now. We wouldn't be able to do that. Instead, I'd have to use an easel and a chalk block, right? I don't know if you're familiar with those things, but it's a contraption that just holds up a piece of paper behind you, basically, and then you just write on it. And now, so I would basically kind of reproduce this outline onto that as we went and talked about it. So it'd be a bunch of little bullet marks or whatever. So may have to use a chalk board, right? I'm sure we're familiar with those. Some pastors still do presentations of one of their sermons and in their Sunday schools or Wednesday evening classes, where they will actually use a picture, and they will draw a picture as they're talking about something, and by the time they're done finishing whatever that subject matter is, develop a beautiful picture on the background that reinforces the learning that was done for that day. And so that's something that, if that's the case, do we have those things available? Do they not, and you're used to teaching that way? Well, you're going to have to modify things. You want to know that before you get into the environment. So are there any video references, video things that they can use? Do you have videos that's going to reinforce your training? If so, do you have what's necessary to play it on? Do you have a television? Do you have the VCR or the computer, the CD player, that kind of thing? Then also audio resources. It's the same thing. Do we have microphones that would function? Do you need one in the environment? Would it help the learning, or would it actually hinder? Sometimes having too much audio can take away from the learning. People can't concentrate because they're being overwhelmed. I wear hearing aids a lot, and so the question becomes, I can't forget my hearing aids, because if so, I can't hear what the students are asking me. Right? And I have to ask them over and over and over again, or have them put it in different ways so I can pull words out of what they're saying, and that can be distractive to the learning. Reference materials. What reference materials are you going to be using? I recommend, as much as you can, any reference to materials you use. If you have a PowerPoint presentation like this, you could put them into there so the students could have them, but at least have a list of them somewhere, so that way the student can go and reference those materials themselves, and they can develop their own learning. That's the importance of reference material. So someone else could pick up what you're doing, and they can go further into your studies, because even like this class, it is a very, it's just an outline class. It's just a very little basics of what you need to know. If you want to know a lot more, you can certainly dig into it by going and finding out and get some good books on teaching and maybe leadership and things like that, and going in there, maybe classes on how to give speeches and do that kind of stuff, oral presentations, those kind of things. The more you learn about that stuff, the better your class is going to be. And is the class going to require a field trip? Would it enhance the learning to have a field trip, to go somewhere to do something? If you're going to teach a class on, let's say, versions of the Bible, or the history of the Bible itself, like talking about the actual history, how it was made, who are the publishers of the original first Bibles in English, Then we might want to take a field trip to, the Bible Museum if you have one close by you, something like that. Or you may want to take some pictures and bring them back and present them to everybody, let them see those things. So that's some things we could talk about with that. The other deal is, if you take a field trip, unlike all these pastors and stuff, you'll see them on their well-to-do pastors, we'll say. They're able to go to Israel, stuff like that, and bring some of their church with them. And then they actually give classes out there while they're on the Jordan River or in front of, the tomb of Jesus, or, that kind of thing, the tomb of James, or whatever it is. And they just make a class out there and present it with it. In that case, a lot of these other things are not going to be available, but this part is, and it's an awesome learning environment and taking that field trip. With that, of course, comes cost. So if you're going to take a field trip, there's going to be a cost. You got to cover gas and all that kind of stuff. So then the deal becomes, although you would love to do this great extravagant class, is it going to be affordable, effective to teach that in that method or with that way? Is the field trip going to be something that either the institution, the teacher, or the students, or the combination find acceptable to pay the cost to go to? For instance, if you're here in the Houston Galveston area, if you want to go to a museum to give a class on something, then it's going to cost so much per individual to go to the museum. Is that going to hinder some of your students from being able to go there? And if it does, do you have a way to counter that cost for them so that they can attend? The other deal is it's going to be a time issue involved in that also. Time of the day, time of the week, when is it going to be accessible? The other thing is you have to balance out, if you're going to try and give a class from there, then you need to make coordinations to get a room available for them, or to have a special tour done so they have that, and that would cost more money. The other thing is just normal cost. It's going to cost, like I said, the teacher just to put on the material itself, no matter what. You can't get around it. But you can pray for that, and the Lord will help you with that. The other deal is the cost to the students. We want to keep the cost to students as minimal as possible. You do want them to have some kind of investment in the learning, and that may be something that's, if you give certain classes, they have those little modules where they already have them made, and then you can have the student can buy a book that goes along with study material. You can do those things. If you develop your own class and you have some stuff for the students that you developed, it's going to cost you to print those things, and if you want to have the students possibly recur some of that cost for you, that's up to you and your church, however you want to do that. As much as possible, I try not to put any kind of cost to my student directly. They're welcome to donate to help and with those kind of things, having an understanding that this stuff costs money, but I don't ask them to do it in order to get the training. As you can see, we do a lot of training here with different subject materials, and that thing is out there for anybody who's interested in learning it. And that's the way, as far as like biblical courses and stuff like that is, we really want to teach those for free to the student, because we really want them to learn the valuable lessons that are in there, because this is the way that they grow in maturity, and they get to see who God is by being taught and discipled. And in our society's moved so far apart, where we all used to be all in this one little village and all this kind of stuff. In American society, at least, and I think Western society, we have this tendency where we have just the nucleus of the family has been dissipated by the enemy, and now people just go off and float off anywhere, and so we no longer have this nuclear family. Instead, we have, like we have here with this, it's a distant learning family, right? Where we go through and just try to reach people as best we can. And so it makes it kind of difficult to disciple people. And we really, as Christians, we want to be active disciplers. We need this one-on-one relationship with one another, and we need to be able to see one another and watch one another grow and be encouraged in that way. So, if at all possible, no cost to the student. Remember that you're actually working this thing for the Lord, and let the Lord take care of whatever costs and things are needed. But you need to be wise about what you're doing. Don't go and just do a field trip, just have a field trip in there where it's going to cost too much money for people to attend. Keep that in mind, or it's going to make you go broke trying to help people out. So is it economical to the institution, to the teacher, and to the student? That's the bottom line. All right, next thing we should consider, as I put this word in there, cyclic. Is it a cyclic course? In other words, what I really want to know is this something that I'm going to have to teach again? The reason why is because it helps us with that cost. There are certain materials that I'm going to produce in teaching and giving stuff out to students. If I know I'm going to have to do it again, and I say if I'm taking stuff to a publisher or a printer to get them done professionally, then I know that if I order certain amounts, then I can get a cost reduction on that, right? A discount. And it might be worth the discount if I know that I'm going to have to teach the class again, rather than have to go and reproduce that stuff again in a year or something like that. The other thing is that if it is going to be done in a year, then a lot of this material that I've already produced, I don't have to go through reproducing it. I just need to refamiliarize myself with it when it comes up. And then maybe I can actually make it even more in depth next time, because I already have this framework done. If I decide to go further into this class a little bit later, then I can take what I've already done and start developing the individual topics deeper, and then that makes a more robust class that I can give later. So we keep as much as we can. So the material, what material we need to identify will I need to keep, what material is going to need to be replaced, what material will need to be updated, and then is it economical to reproduce the class? In other words, if it costs me too much this time, it may be a class, you know what, we're never going to give this class again because it's just not worth it. Anyway, so in how to prepare a class, okay, we also need to learn these things right here. And one is like, how is it going to be evaluated? So are we going to have tests? Are we going to have learning activities? And the presentations is the main things we're looking at here. So if we're going to give tests, which I highly recommend, you can give a written test, but in a Sunday school environment, I really recommend the oral test. Oral tests are something as simple as having a memory verse that everybody does. Everybody in the class does a memory verse, and maybe at each class or each one, or after a class, after you've mentioned the memory verse several times throughout the class, then you go through and just ask them one at a time. Okay, can you give me the memory verse? And even start them leading into it, because a lot of them will know the memory verse or whatever the material you're looking for, but they'll be kind of gun shy on opening their mouth and committing to doing that. The good thing is they're able to do that, to open their mouth and commit to doing it. One of the main reasons why we teach people about Jesus is that we want them to tell someone else. So this already gets them in that condition of going ahead and telling somebody and having the confidence in knowing what they're saying is true. And that's what we want them to be able to do. So some kind of test is advisable. We need to also establish learning activities, knowledge games, trivia pursuits, or something like that to help reinforce your training. So if you're doing a series, which is what this is talking about, a whole line of classes, you can actually, as you go through with each class, you can do trivia back to the last class. That's a good way to do a review, actually, is to do that. Self-reflection and participation. That should be something we can do throughout the class. So then you can probably, if we were in person, a good way to start this class, I would ask somebody, have anyone here ever taught a class? Right, okay, the first time you taught the class, did anyone teach you how to give the class? Right, and then you get those personal experiences going out, and then people will be more engaged and willing to participate. And you'll learn some things. You may learn some things for your class that you hadn't considered yourself. And so it's good for the teacher to be taught by the student to a degree. So certifications. Are you going to offer certifications as a class? There's a lot of classes that they have a series, a lot of churches have a series of classes that they do for discipleship. And then once they've done the series, at the end, they're awarded in front of the church. That's a little certificate that says they finished the discipleship program for their church. And a lot of churches will use that certificate along with their baptismal certificate, and then they'll invite someone to join the church. And you're not allowed to join the church until you've completed that little certificate program. That's something. Some colleges and seminaries offer certification programs. They're not accredited programs, but what they are is, because they don't pay for the accreditation, but the student gets to go through and go get some pretty close to the seminary level training or teachings without all the having to pay the cost, but they don't get, like I said, they don't get the master's degree or whatever, but they get a lot of the good knowledge from it, and instead they get a certification. So it's possible like that. Maybe you get a certification in biblical or what do you call it, biblical creationism or something like that, right? Where you're certified to go and tell other people that you know about how the world was made, how God made it in 6 days, and you've got the basic tools and stuff you need to go out and make a good oral argument for that cause. And that just gives a student a little bit of self-confidence. That's really what those certifications are for. Capital projects. Capital projects are projects outside of the class that you want the student to do that reinforces the learning that was done in the class. An example would be, I guess, if we went on to, we could do, if we kept on with Noah's Ark, a capital project may be to rebuild the ark, right? Or to make a poster or a picture or a painting, whatever their skill is with some kind of craft, and bring it back to class. They go home, they make the, I'll just say like a wooden ark, right? And carve out some animals or stuff with it. And then they place it around in the dill, however they think it may have looked. And then they have to come back and explain the feature that they made, the ark exhibit that they made. Something like that. It's a good capital project for that. Written submissions. Have them do a summary of the class, of the course, of what they've learned. That's an excellent way, because it lets them actually sit down with themselves and go through and go, okay, this is what I've done. Or when I came here, I expected to learn this. I actually learned that, or I didn't learn this. The course was not where I wanted. So it's a good thing for you to use an evaluation for yourself, but it's really written to get into the student's head so they can feel comfortable about what they've learned and how to express it. The other deal is for learning activities, or is I actually got it here separately as presentations, but that's because I wanted to pull it out. It's kind of important. Having skits, even for adults, is a worthwhile investment in time for you. If you can find some online, or if you can create some yourself, or you got someone else, a partner with which I recommend all teachers and Sunday school have partners, y'all develop skits together. And I think that's going to be an awesome thing to use, because it gets people thinking about the subject matter themselves. Assuming, of course, you've done your research, your homework, and you've made a skit concerning to the subject at hand. So even you don't have to go out and be all kind of new and knowing about it, but what you need to do is you could take the text itself, Noah's Ark, and you can talk about, maybe draw a little skit out between two people, between Noah and God, maybe, upon what's being said back and forth in the text to get Noah to build that ark, right? To build up his faith so that he would believe in God, and to take God at his word, and that he would become faithful enough to where God would go ahead and spare his family. So you could build a simple little skit like that. It'd be a nice thing that people would learn. The students get to perform the skit or read the skit out to one another. Other students get to watch it, and then if you build the expectation that every time you're bringing a skit and you get different students to do it every time, then everyone gets a chance. And although they will act like they don't want to do it, about halfway through the skit, they're really loving it. I've done it with children and with adults, and they all love it. They all start off not wanting to do it, all being shy, but you do 2 or 3 of those, and they're all wanting to be in the next skit. So it's worth the time. It's great to see them grow in that. Video testimonies are the same thing. If you can get a hold of people maybe who went through the class before, sit them down for 5 minutes to get them video testimony of what they've learned, how it's changed their lives, stuff like that, or how a certain principle in what you're teaching has changed their lives, or something they didn't know, how someone came to know Jesus through whatever it is, if it's related to your subject material, then that's an awesome thing there. Also, video testimonies are good for, you don't have to go and buy the presentations that are already done through a lot of Bible studies throughout today. There are plenty of subject matter experts nowadays around the areas. If you go to your local colleges like that, you can probably find reputable professors who are willing to take the time to share with you things about that you may not have considered. Like if you're doing the class on the history and how Noah's Ark was, you may be able to find a history teacher at some college and talk to them about ancient, Hebrew and stuff like that. I'm sure you could find someone there you can interview, ask them some good questions concerning to the subject matter upon, maybe how difficult was it to carry water back then, right? What kind of devices did they use? How would they have been able to load that stuff into the ark? All those kinds of things like that. Very good information that you could probably find from an instructor anywhere, no matter where you're at. You're there in the United States and probably in other places also. So, develop your classes. All right, so in developing your classes, then what we're looking for is we're looking to establish the learning objectives of the class towards the course and learning material. We're going to develop our course learning objectives, and we're going to develop a teaching outline for each class, have prepared teaching aids, rehearse the classes, anticipate questions, and put it on the calendar. These are the things that we're looking for when we're actually still developing the class, but these things help us to do things. Some of this stuff we kind of already talked about, so some of this is reinforcement, but it's very important information. So if you, moving forward, you'll see the things that we're going to be hitting, and I just want to do a review because reviews are very helpful to your class. So if you do a review, then, and which I recommend you do, then you should instruct the new Bible study and Sunday school teachers in how to make a course of study. That is what we've been talking about. And so that's basically all you need to do is kind of a restatement of what it is that we've been trying to do here. Today we've been trying to learn a little bit about how to do a study, or how to do the what all is going to take into it. And this is the outside approach. As we move into the next few classes, we're going to get identified in how they actually build the classes and how to do those things. So we're going to go through in our final review, and you can even do something just like this, like I have here, where it says, at this time, the students should be familiar with how to. A lot of the classes I've been through in the military, that's exactly how this ends. When you come to the review, this is what you see. At this time, you should be able to, and then you just go through what it is. So now, at this time, you should be able to outline a course objective. That's one of the first things we went over. How do we title the course, and how do we identify what the objectives are? You should determine the subject matter. What is it we're going to be teaching? Am I going to be teaching, if I'm going to be teaching throughout the whole Bible, then each book of the Bible could be a course. And the overall, the Bible, if I'm going to be teaching about Noah, we went through all the different Noah courses that we could have taught then. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to determine training objectives. In order to teach those things, what are the other things that we're going to have to teach to make sure that we can move into those subjects smoothly? Create a suitable title. Again, the title of the course kind of sets the tone for the course, and that's where the students are going to get their main information upon whether they're even going to take the course or not. Determine the target audience. Identify who it is you're going to be talking to, because it matters on how you present the information and what kind of information you have available for them, what level of learning. Identify resources necessary for the students themselves. Now, if you determine what it is you're going to teach and who you're going to teach it to, now we need to know how it is we're going to relay the information to them. That's what that's saying, basically. Then plan for costs. Again, we try to keep costs to a minimum because nobody likes to spend money. We certainly don't like to ask for money. And so we want to everyone to be able to participate in the learning, and I want to be able to teach somebody. So we keep costs to a minimum. Determine evaluation standards. What is it are we going to use to determine if what we've taught is what was actually learned, is what that's saying. And that is basically, in a nutshell, what we're looking for teaching. Next we'll be moving into some other classes where we go through showing how to build the individual outline for the class, how to make a syllabus, and those kinds of things. All right? May God bless you and keep you. Amen.